Being a leader requires us to be able to create teams. Today, we're going to talk about how to create a dream team right here on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to help you lead more confidently and make a bigger difference, both professionally and personally. This episode is sponsored by Kevin's free weekly e-newsletter, Unleashing Your Remarkable Potential, which is full of articles and resources to help you become a more confident and successful leader. Sign up by going to remarkablepodcast.com/newsletter. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Welcome back to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. If I said these three words to you, engagement, productivity, and happiness, you'd say, yes, please. How about some more of those things? That's what we're going to talk about today with our guest, Mike Zani. Mike is here, and let me introduce him, and then we'll dive in. Mike is the CEO of the Predictive Index, a talent optimization platform that uses over 60 years of proven science and software to help businesses design high-performing teams and cultures, make objective hiring decisions, and inspire greatness in people. It's over 8,000 clients, include Bain Capital, Blue Cross Blue Shield, DoorDash, Nissan, Omni Hotels, VMware, and many more. His new book is titled, hold that up, Mike, for those who are watching, The Science of Dream Teams, How Talent Optimization Can Drive Engagement, Productivity, and Happiness, as promised. He is also the co-founder and partner at Phoenix Strategy Investments, a private investment fund. An avid sailor, he was the coach of the 1996 U.S. Olympic team. He holds a BS from Brown and an MBA from the Harvard Business School. He's our guest today. Mike, welcome. I'm glad
Kevin,
that you're
great to be here. Great to be here. Thanks for the energy.
This is going to be fun. You said earlier that everyone from Indiana is positive. I don't know if that's true. And for people that watch this regularly, you're going to say, Kevin, you're not in your normal spot, which I'm not. I am in Michigan today, but I'm happy to be with all of you. So I'm going to ask a question, Mike, that I ask a lot of people at the start, because I get the chance to talk to really interesting and obviously accomplished people here. And so just tell us a little bit about your journey. Sort of, you didn't wake up when you were 8 and say, I want to run a company called Predictive Index. You couldn't spell that at age 8. So tell us a little bit about the journey that gets you here.
I have a wingnut background, Kevin, because I was a really avid sailor, and most of my 20s I spent as a sailing coach and a professional sailor trying to make a living in an industry where it's not that easy to make a living. And
I was going to say, can that even really be done?
It can be. Actually, some of my friends who didn't leave the path, they have very happy, healthy lives. It's a romantic lifestyle, but as an avid reader of all maritime and naval history, it doesn't end well if you want to have a family as a sailor. You're away from home. When I coached the '96 Olympics, I was 330 days on the road that year. And it was really that desire to have a more stable life that got me into business. And it actually was the marine business. We ended up, a group of people bought Sunfish and Laser, which are two very popular small sailboats. And business was the first time I was excited about anything as much as I was sailing. The competitive environment of business, the sort of intellectual curiosity you get to make these businesses tick, which actually, that I wanted training, and the marine industry isn't necessarily a great training ground for business. It's a niche industry. There's a lot of people in it for lifestyle purposes. So I went to business school as a trade school. I really wanted to learn the trade of business. And I applied to 3 business schools, got rejected from 2, but was lucky enough to get into Harvard. I don't know why.
That's probably not the normal story. I applied to 7, got into all of them except Harvard, but you got into Harvard. Probably because they said, this dude's different, right?
They wanted to sprinkle a little wingnut into their stew. And I was the lucky person to get that call. And I feel really quite blessed about that because I met my wife, I met my business partner, I met my business model, and half of our investors, were classmates. So it's just sort of like, how did I win the lucky lottery?
Well,
But
it's always in the journey, right? So go ahead. I think I interrupted you.
it, well, it was so Daniel, my business partner at Phoenix Strategy Investments, and when we buy one company at a time with other people's money because we were not independently wealthy. The model's called a search fund. So we invested in our first company in 2004, actually in Westland, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit, might be near you. And you take day-to-day operating roles. And it's sort of like buying and flipping homes, except you buy a company and you try and fix it, grow it, and then sell it. It was that journey. Daniel and I had this similar sort of epiphany. Wow, you can buy a company and put yourself in charge. And when you have wingnut backgrounds where people weren't giving me a job at McKinsey and Company or Goldman Sachs,
Right.
this seemed pretty good.
So that's what you've done. So I want to dive into the book. In fact, I'm going to take maybe a unique approach to how we talk about the book and what you've learned from it. But before we do that, the company is, and I can see behind your head the PI on the wall on the glass there. There you go. The company is the Predictive Index, and that is the name of the company is the major tool. So talk briefly so people know if they don't know, because it'll frame a lot of the rest of our conversation. Talk about what the Predictive Index does.
Well, the Predictive Index is a 65-year-old company, a little older than that, 1955. And it was originally a singular psychometric assessment. And we were clients for 10 years before we invested in the Predictive Index in 2014. And we wanted to turn it into so much more because we were like, this is a brilliant tool. This is a great product, but we really need to build a lot of surround around the tool in software and a larger certified partner network. And it's really been a dream job because we help companies build talent optimization strategies so that they can have the people to deploy their actual strategies. And it's really great work to do, and it's very rewarding.
Okay, cool. So now the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to take the book and I'm going to take a bunch of the words in the title and frame our conversation around those words. And so
Perfect.
First of all, and I don't know, I'm envisioning, because you were involved in the U.S. Olympic team in 1996, that might have something to do with the title Dream Team. I don't know. But my question is, all right, that's sort of a big promise in the title of the book. How do you define, or what is a dream team?
I think everyone has been on good and bad teams. The dream team that you're on, when you're on a dream team, you go home energized from working with that team, and it enables you, empowers you to be a better spouse, a better parent, a better member of your community, because it's a net provider of energy. And those teams hopefully happen at work for some people. They don't always. It could be their bowling league. Who knows? But when you're on a dream team, you get to be you on your best day almost every day. And the output and the performance is not only joyful, but is usually of high caliber. And that's really a dream team.
I love that phrase, a net provider of energy, because so many people. I'll say two things about that, Mike. First of all, I think it's an apt description, and secondly, there are so many people. They are probably not the people that have sought out and are watching or listening to us, but there are many people who don't even believe that's possible at work. Maybe they believe it in their bowling team, but they don't think it's even possible at work. So I think I can hear and see your energy about the work that you're doing, and certainly about this book, and being an example of this idea of. But I love that idea of net provider of energy. That's really great.
When I was trying to make it as a professional sailors sometimes get hired by wealthy people to come on their multi-million-dollar race boats and win. And I would always ask, the rich person who owned the boat, I'm like, are we trying to win this weekend, Or are we trying to build and develop over the long term? And almost universally, they're like, we win now. That's the goal. And you would get on these boats with the mandate of winning immediately, and you would be parachuting into their culture, their team. And you would get to see, was it a dream team or was it not a dream team? And you could tell within 15 minutes, you're like, oh my God, I'm in a toxic environment. That this is going to be the world's worst weekend, and it's not worth the money they're paying me. Versus you can parachute into some world-class teams and be like, we are clicking. And you can tell immediately. And I would suspect that our audience knows when they're on a great team or not, almost instantaneously.
Yeah, I would guess that this is true for you as well. Having the chance to sort of parachute in as a consultant or as a speaker into lots of, into client organizations and client teams. I get that chance to see it, not as a team member, but as a, an important observer, I suppose would be a way to say that. And it's pretty clear pretty quickly in most cases. And again, the reason I think it's so important is that some people haven't even ever had an experience where that's truly possible at work, right? So the next big phrase in the title of the book, which you already mentioned a little bit when we were talking about the index itself, is this idea of talent optimization. Now, these are fancier words than dream team, right? What does that mean practically for a leader in an organization? What does it mean to optimize talent, and how do we go about doing that?
Talent optimization is really a new discipline, and it's a discipline that is helping leaders and managers create higher performing teams. And I like to say every CEO has a strategy, some good, some bad. Most have a financial plan, 1 to 5 years, to support that strategy. But tragically few actually have a talent strategy. They have boxes in Excel that says, hey, we're hiring 5 people this quarter. But you're like, what kind of people? How much are you going to pay them? What do you need them to do? What personalities do they need to have? What cognitive capabilities? How are they going to fit on this team? And those who've come before us in sport, actually, this discipline change in sport happened 30 years ago. But Billy Beane, Sabermetrics, Moneyball, is we demand in sport that our teams are optimized. And on Monday morning, after our team wins or loses, we are brutal critics of their performance. We don't do the same discipline in business, where we try and take our most important asset. In a modern company, 65% of your income statement expense are people and people related. Why wouldn't you try and optimize that? And if you were a sports team, you would, or you'd be fired summarily.
And sports teams do, right? So they spend more time thinking about that on the front end. They don't always get it right. We're not always going to get it right. And the other interesting thing, they're taking us back to our culture conversation. And I've had this, I'm careful to not overuse sports analogies, right? Because they don't work for everybody. But you don't have to know much about sports to know this, that sometimes a player will languish someplace, same player, same skill set, put them in a new environment on a new team with a new leader, coach, and everything changes. And it's about what's around them, not about them, as it were, right? So getting this, mapping this and hooking this together is super important.
And that is the piece of optimization. It's optimization besides just talent strategy is the hard part. When you said parachuting into a team and then leaving, that's easy. It's when you're on a team, and how do you make that team with those people great? Maybe you can add 1 or 2 people, maybe you can train, maybe you could remove one, but you can't. Most people aren't empowered to change the whole thing unless they quit. So it's like, how do you make your team better and optimize the talent around you and reorganize it as needed? And that's what we try and really lay out in the book, is the scientific and systemic way to do that.
Yeah, and that is one of the strengths of the book. And so, give us a couple of specific ideas that people, obviously, we're talking with Mike Zani, the author of the new book, Dream Team. You're going to want to get a copy, but give us a couple of quick ideas that leaders at any level, and because sometimes people are listening and say, this is all great, CEO should be listening to this podcast, but like wherever I am as a leader in the organization, give me a couple of quick ideas of things that I could be thinking about that would help me optimize the talent on my team.
Even if you're an individual contributor, you have to manage across and up. So you are managing people. You may not know it as explicitly. You don't wake up in the morning thinking as much about management, but this is at every level. You should be trying to optimize your dream team, even as an individual contributor. But as a manager, as a leader, the first thing that you need to do if you want to be on a dream team is start working on yourself and self-awareness. Because if you're not self-aware, you'll never be able to craft dream teams consistently, because it comes from you being amazing and you working on the things that you need to work on, you being transparent and open and vulnerable about the things that you're working on, because the manager and leader triggers the positive reinforcement. You're like, if the boss can work on stuff and is really open, like, hey, I'm not perfect, then it can be like, maybe I need to work on some stuff too.
Right. Absolutely. And here's the thing, to say, well, I'm awesome and I need everyone else to level up so we have a dream team isn't really a very good approach. You talk about this idea of the T-shirt as a metaphor, the front and the back of the T-shirt. So I think you're kind of heading there. So why don't we talk about that metaphor and how it relates to us, whether we're an individual contributor or a leader. And by the way, if you're a leader, you're also an individual contributor, right, to other teams. So talk about that for a second, Mike.
Well, I got to give credit to Jim Allen, a partner at Bain & Company, who came up with this framework. But front of T-shirt, back of T-shirt is, an analogy about the things you're good at and the things that take you out. All the things written on the front of your T-shirt have been the reason you've gotten every job you've gotten. Your parents bragged on those things about you, and you puff up your chest when you hear them. And usually it's a long, healthy list. On the back of T-shirt is really the shadow side of those things, the things that can take you out when they manifest in a bad way. A lot of people aren't aware of them. And that's why the T-shirt analogy works so well. It's like you have to work hard to find out what's on the back of your T-shirt. And the best way is to ask someone, because they know what's on the back of your T-shirt. They probably don't want to tell you because it's not polite. And the really self-aware
especially
leader,
if you're the boss, by the way.
Especially if you're the boss. But actually, we've created a culture around this in our organization. There will be managers who will send out anonymous Google forms. Just say, hey, tell me what's on the back of my T-shirt. I want to know. And it's anonymous, and they get feedback immediately on this stuff. And they have to, it's not that you just have to stop at identifying it. You also have to realize, when does it happen? How do you feel it coming on? What are the triggers? And what are things that I can do to circumvent this? Because you live with these things, and you have to realize that if you don't conquer them or coexist with them, you're not going to be the best leader you can be.
Yeah, 100%. And you said something at the start of this that I want to go back and highlight. You said what's on the back of the T-shirt is sometimes the shadow of what's on the front. So it's not just the things that, man, I'm not as good at these things, but sometimes they're the other end of the spectrum of the positives. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Say if you're a great decision maker under pressure, you're like, what a great skill. But it's just like, you probably overuse that tool and maybe run people over with your amazing decision making. And you should be like, maybe I should be more inclusive in my decision making. So the thing that might make you great as a time of crisis, great decision maker, maybe you have a train wreck of people that you've run over and not listened to and behind you. So you have to realize that shadow side, when things get too extreme or too much, you use that club or that attribute too often.
There is definitely such a thing as too much of a good thing, right? So another one of the words in the title, Mike, is engagement. One of the, top 5 overused consultancy words on the planet. currently is engagement, and yet it's super, super important. You have some thoughts about how to track and measure it that I'd love for you to talk about a little bit.
Yeah, certainly engagement.
Well, actually, before we do that, I'm sorry, but what's your definition? Let's start there. What's your definition of engagement, and then go from there.
When people are connected to the mission, values of the company, that they are engaged, and you get this discretionary effort from them. When they're disengaged, you don't. And if people could control engagement, they would put this spice on everything. They'd use it like most people use salt. Just use it. And we've been spending, for the last 15 years, we've been spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to move engagement as a business community, and it's barely moved at all. Yet some people can create systemically highly engaged organizations, and it is something that it's hard to coach. But it does start with this self-awareness. It does start with having a really clear, well-articulated mission and culture, and getting people to participate in that. And people will self-select for companies. They're like, I don't like this company. They're too happy for me, or they don't like the Kool-Aid. Then don't drink it. And I think you have to wear that proudly. You wear your mission proudly. You wear your culture proudly. You sing it from the treetops, and those who want to be engaged with you will follow you, and those who don't will find other places to go.
Well, that certainly, yeah. I mean, you use that phrase, discretionary effort. We use that when we talk about engagement all the time. And the other word that we use is caring. When we care about the work, about our work output, about the people we work with, about the outcomes that our organization creates, then we are engaged, and all kinds of good things come from that. And I think the other thing that's so reflect on this, agree or disagree. I think the other big mistake we've made in all these huge investments that organizations have made to try to create this is that they've said, leaders, this is your job to create it. And while leaders can create the environment that makes it easier, the reality is people have to make a choice. And we can't make people choose that, right? What we can do is create an environment which makes it easier for them to make that choice, to choose engagement versus disengagement. Agree, disagree, thoughts about that?
You broke up for a second there, so I may have lost the nuance, but I do think that we have this amazing tool out there in Glassdoor. You look at the reviews of your company, and you can find out, are people engaged or not? What do they like? What do they don't like? What do they call malarkey on? I almost said BS. What do they call malarkey on? And you can find out people are using this before they even apply to your company. And it's a screening tool to say, I don't like the culture, or I am totally addicted to this culture. I can't read enough of these reviews. And people actually want to see some bad ones. There's something is, if your Glassdoor rating is too good, people go, wait a minute, that something might not be right here. They're seeing it.
Right. My daughter, now the world is very different. My daughter just graduated from university. And the world is very different, Mike, than when I was in school, and probably when you're younger than me, but probably when you were in school. And that is that, they shop the professors. They got 5 that teach this class, and they're doing the equivalent of Glassdoor on the professors to decide which session they want to be in. We didn't have that. I mean, we might have known some of that informally a little bit, but we didn't have the tools, nor did we really, have the capability to do that back when I was in school, so very long ago.
Yeah, it is an interesting world of data. And people, why would you go to a 2-star restaurant unless you were like stuck in an airport? You wouldn't. So people don't have to do that. They don't have to go to a 2-star company.
Yeah, I think those disparities are going to get larger. You and I are having this conversation in early July. No one else is really going to hear or see this until November. But I think it'll still be a true statement. It'll just be starting to come to fruition, is that as organizations move through the pandemic and into what their future of work looks like, I think those disparities are going to get bigger, not smaller.
We have the churn tidal wave that is coming. People are leaving in droves. And it's a confluence. One, they've been stuck for for 12 months in a job. So there's some pent up churn that's going to shake loose. But the last 12 months has also been an awakening towards things that are important, social issues. And people are realizing, I want to spend my life working on things that are important to me. And people are losing people because they're not truly engaged with the work.
Yep. Back to engagement. There's another, we could talk a lot about productivity, which is in the title of the book, but we've talked about on the podcast, we've talked a lot about that. So I want to go to the other word that's left, which we've also talked about a good bit here, but it's not nearly as common in a business book title as engagement, and that is happiness. So why is happiness in the title of the book?
So there's a question my wife and I ask ourselves all the time. And she was interviewed once and someone asked her this question, and it was, how would you double your happiness? And at first, a lot of people get defensive. They're like, I'm happy. And I'm like, I didn't say you weren't happy. Just how would you double your happiness? And you're like, I couldn't be twice as happy. And you go, wait a minute. When I had one child, I was like, I could never love anything as much as this child. And then you have a second, you go, oh, it turns out I can. So what, everyone can double their happiness, but your answer, Kevin, and my answer should be different. For some people, it is, I need more money. They're on a part of the financial curve that more money would help. Other, it's more control. Sometimes it's more connection. But asking people and having people ask themselves, how would I double my happiness? That is probably one of the most important things you could do in life. And work can play an important role in this. And if you are truly engaged with the people that you manage, you want to know their career objectives, you want to know their happiness. If you can help them be more happier, the productivity rains off that person. This is why people listen to podcasts on the way to work, or wake up thinking about great ideas, or will take a customer complaint call after 5 p.m. Because you've given back to them happiness, engagement, and they're happy to give you the productivity. They love to do it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. In fact, we often say that when people choose to be engaged, right, when they make that choice, one of the things they get is greater happiness. They enjoy their work more, they enjoy their life more as a result. So like, who wouldn't want to make that choice when those two things come together? I mentioned that we're having this conversation in July, and it really doesn't matter when people are listening because we've all lived through this pandemic. I'm kind of shifting the gears a little bit here, Mike. I really want to know, because not only have you written this book and you have all these thoughts and we've been sharing those things, you're leading an organization as well. And so I'm curious from your perspective, what are one or two lessons that you've learned leading through this pandemic?
The greatest lesson our company learned was that productivity increased in the pandemic. And not just by a little bit. Our technology team is 70% more productive post-pandemic than they were pre-pandemic. And we ended up getting a lot of fewer meetings, better meetings, less commuting time. We could more easily optimize teams because we didn't have to do it physically. We weren't fighting for conference room space. And the thing that I'm now concerned about as we go back to hybrid, 100% remote, we figured out. How do we make hybrid work? I just had the first in-person meeting with some of our bankers, and we were trying to figure out, okay, there were 3 of us in a conference room. How do we tie the other people in without creating that power imbalance to make sure that we do hybrid as well as the fully remote? But the productivity piece, what this did, our tech team, it's really hard to recruit tech talent in Boston if you have to be in a certain location. Because people said, I'm not commuting that far. That's a hard suburb to get to from my house. Now we can hire tech talent all over the place.
You don't have to be in Boston. You can be in Bulgaria. No one cares, right?
No one cares.
I don't think there's any question about that. So is there anything, Mike, as we really do start to wind down, is there anything else that you wished I would have asked, or maybe one thing that you think it would be useful to share that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, I was going to suggest to readers. There's a book by James Fowler and Dr. Nicholas Christakis called Connected, and it's principally about health. But the reason I bring it up here in the discussion that we've had about happiness and engagement is happiness and engagement are interconnected. That when you have happy, engaged people, they create happy, engaged people, so that you can create an environment, this positive cycle, and it really pays for itself for years if you do it, and it really takes you out if you don't invest in it. So at least skim Connected. It's not a new book. It's probably 10 years old, but it is a great read and is very factually based because they based it on the Framingham Heart Study with 100,000 people,
Right.
like 40-year longitudinal
I was going
study.
to say longitudinal study. So question for you. Everyone's going to surmise part of this answer. The question is, what do you do for fun? And everyone's going to say, well, he likes sailing. But what do you do for fun, Mike?
That's an easy answer for me because I do like sailing and boating. But I actually work in my shop with my hands rebuilding old boats. But the idea is I get a lot of joy because you work in software. You don't make stuff as much, so
Not tangible.
it's really fun to go in with my kids into the workshop and rebuild old stuff, and you make something beautiful, and you don't throw something away. So that's what I do for fun.
All right. So you mentioned Connected, but what are you and we'll make sure that book is on the in the show notes for everybody. But what are you reading now, or what's something you've read recently that you might recommend, Mike?
Well, I've got to give a shout out to one of my old sailing coaches, Nathaniel Philbrick. He writes nonfiction, and people are going to say, "Whoa, nonfiction!" But he writes nonfiction in such a way that he's the greatest storyteller I've ever heard. And I'm reading Into the Hurricane Eye, which was about George Washington and the French and the Battle of Yorktown, and we know how this ends, right? Like we all know how this ends, but yet it's a page turner, and you're like, Nathaniel Philbrick is a genius, and he's got books on the Mayflower and Custer's Last Stand and Moby Dick. You got to pick up this guy. He's amazing.
Into the Hurricane Eye is the title, and we'll have that in the show notes for you as well. So now the question, Mike, that you really wanted me to ask is, where can people learn more about your work, about the Predictive Index, about the book? Where do you want to point people today before we go?
Well, the book has a website called dreamteams.io, and you can learn about the book. There's a sample chapter, but you can also take assessments on that webpage. And if they want to learn about the Predictive Index, predictiveindex.com. We've got a lot of great content on talent optimization that's free to access, and I hope they enjoy snacking on that. If they're interested in talent and making better teams, they'll get some good stuff there.
Dreamteams, plural.io. Everybody, make sure you caught that if you're multitasking while you're listening. So before we go now, I have a question for everyone else, all of you who've been patiently and hopefully enjoyably listening to us. The question is this. I ask you every week this question. Now what? What are you going to do as a result of this? Perhaps you're going to spend some time thinking about this idea of creating a dream team that is a net provider of energy. Perhaps you're going to talk and think about the front and the back of your t-shirt. Perhaps you're going to just spend some time in general thinking about how could you be more self-aware, or who you could get feedback from that could help you be clearer about where you're at. Perhaps you're going to think about any of the other things we've talked about today, including asking yourself that question, how could you double your happiness? I'm just looking at my notes, thinking of a couple of things that I thought of. And perhaps you're going to say, how can I use the word of the day, which is malarkey? But whatever it might be, I hadn't heard that word in a while, and it's a better choice than the one that we all use all the time. So thank you for that, Mike. So for all of you, that's the key for you. Hopefully you find this enjoyable and interesting and all of those things. But at the end of the day, if you don't take any action, what's really, really, truly, what's the point? Mike, thank you so much for being here. It was an absolute pleasure to have you.
Kevin, you've built my happiness this morning. So thank you. I love your energy and you are a great interviewer. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Before we go, everybody, today's episode was brought to you by Remarkable Master Classes. Each month we release a new skill in an advanced form of masterclass format designed to help you become the remarkable leader and human you were born to be. Details on how to get on board for a specific skill or to get discounts each month can be found at remarkablemasterclass.com. Hope you'll do that, and I hope you'll be back here next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We'll see you soon. Thanks.